So I did Robert Frobisher's character and whether the end satisfies the reading audience, and I have 5 main points about that with like a reading in between, but I might not get time to do the reading. So the first kind of main point about his character, I guess, was that he is always the eternal underdog in the stories. Like, he's a slave to the achievements of others, and that he grew up being in the shadow of his older brother, who was seen as the picture of ideal masculinity, and that he grew up to become the soldier who went away to war and died in a brave kind of way, whereas Frobisher just ran away from his debts and didn't really do anything to help his family out. And then also he was the underdog, or the slave, if you like, to Eris, in that he let him he didn't let him in the end, but he let him kind of plagiarise his work in order to preserve his own fame. And then with Jocasta, it's quite interesting when you see like his relationship with her. Obviously, like, he's just letting her do what she wants, but when she tries to sort of pillow talk him, like, she asks him like, oh, how many other girls have you slept with, and like wants to know everything, and he doesn't really want to answer because his character, he's passive rather than being promiscuous. Like, it doesn't really matter to him, like, the amount of people he's sleeping with. Like, that's not what it's about. I guess the next part of his character would be whether or not he's a fabricant. So he lives his life with like a specific purpose, and it's really significant that he kills himself right after finishing the sextet, because that was his life's work. Like, he says that is his masterpiece. So by killing himself straight afterwards, it makes you kind of link back to Somni, and that's what she did. Like, they were both characters, Somni and Robert Frobisher were both characters capable of doing great things, like ascending from being part of ordinary society to doing great things, which both of them did, but then they both kind of were expelled from that life as soon as their purpose had been fulfilled. Like, does that make sense? The next point was, I'm just trying to remember off the top of my head, that's really bad. The next point was, the reflection of Mitchell, like the author, into Robert Frobisher's character. Like, the way the sextet is constructed, there's a quote, but I can't bother finding it now. It's really long to read and it would take too much time. There's a really long quote, and it's about how the sextet was created, like a melody of like 6 different instruments all weaved together, and there's 6 stories in the book, so it kind of all makes sense how the sextet mirrors the book, because it's called Cloud Atlas as well. And there's like, Mitchell kind of pokes fun at himself by being like, because Frobisher says by the time the sextet is published, it'll be too late for caring about what other people think, because obviously he's going to be dead because he's going to kill himself. But Mitchell is kind of like saying that in the novel, because by the time the novel is published, it'll be too late for what the critics say, because he's going to see this as his masterpiece no matter what. Like, he knew it was going to be successful. And the last point, there was like a last point about, I looked into the philosophy of suicide, and there's lots of kind of the way Frobisher talks about suicide, and particularly like the last 2 pages of the story, there's all the different sorts of views on the philosophy of suicide put into one. Like, he talks about his father and his family and like the majority of society, how they hold like a Christian view, which is completely against suicide. It's immoral, it's evil, it's unjust. Like, it's the easy way out, it's the temporary solution to a permanent, that's not good. And so that's like the anti-suicide thing. But then there's also like, he talks about a neutral stance. Like, he says, the Japanese have the right idea, cowardice has nothing to do with it, suicide takes considerable courage, because the Japanese in ancient times of the samurais used to kill themselves it was seen as honour or bravery in doing so. So that's like a neutral kind of stance on it. And then I think Frobisher and maybe Mitchell reflected into that, their own views on suicide is kind of, it's not pro, but it's more liberalist view that it's the ultimate act of self-ownership, like you're taking ownership of yourself, and that was something Frobisher never really did in his life, apart from killing himself and apart from when he left Eris for plagiarising his work. Those are the only 2 things he did for himself, really. So the liberalist thinking is that suicide is something, it's your own choice, like it's the most basic human right to decide whether you want to be in this world or not. And then beyond that, there's existentialist thinking, which is that, like, why are we even living anyway? Like, are we living to convince ourselves not to kill ourselves because there's no point to life? Like, are we just living life to search for a purpose, and then once we found that purpose, what is there then? Do we search for another one, or do we just kill ourselves? And that relates back to the view of the fabricants, and whether Robert Frobisher is a fabricant and Somni being a fabricant, is that we don't really have a purpose in life, we're just trying to find one, and then once that purpose is fulfilled, we'll just kill ourselves. And I think that shows that Robert Frobisher's character is satisfied by his ending, because he was that kind of person that took ownership of his life in the end, which he never really did before, like showing his development over time, and something that he was ultimately like living a life to please other people in a sense, even though in the end he did something for himself. Yeah, is that my time up?